어떤 놈의 새끼야. 어떤 놈의 새끼야.
The Wailing is a Korean horror/thriller film that's written and directed by Hong-jin. So The Wailing is a film that I've been meaning to review for a very long time. It's a really famous Korean horror film that I've heard for probably 2 or 3 years now. And whenever I hear somebody talk about The Wailing, they always say that it is one of the scariest and one of the best horror films that they've personally ever seen. So as someone who really, really loves the horror genre, I've been really anticipating this film and have been really pumped up to see it. And lately I've just been watching a lot of Korean films, with films like I Saw the Devil, Memories of Murder, Mother, and now with The Wailing. And I've liked pretty much all those films. Mother, I think, is an absolute masterpiece. I have reviews for all those films, so if you haven't seen those yet, please check them out. They're on my channel. So I was obviously really excited to see this movie. And now that I've actually watched it, I can definitely agree that this was a horror film and a thriller film that is quite unlike anything that I've personally ever seen. Because it takes classic folk and theological understandings of good and evil and like ghost spirits and demons and just really of the supernatural in general. And it takes those things and it creates a film that is really hard to predict as you're watching it. And it doesn't have the craziest twists and turns, but what it does is that it keeps you guessing throughout the film, even if certain important, crucial information is revealed to you at certain points. Because around the halfway point, there are certain things about this film that are revealed to you that, are pretty concrete. But there's still like a nice handful of unanswered questions that are revolving around this film's mystery that it definitely tries to unravel as the film goes along. It definitely keeps your interest as the film rolls along, because this is a 2 hour and 38 minute film, I believe. And I don't think every minute of this film was necessary, but I don't think I could really pick out any scene in this film and just remove it from the entire film, because this entire film, even though it is quite lengthy, was really engaging and really entertaining. And one thing that I didn't really expect going into this film is that it's honestly quite funny. Like, the first half of this film, I think, is nearly like a straight horror comedy. And since so many people were talking about just how disturbing and scary it was, that was not something that I really even expected at all from the film. Because I'm telling you, like, in this first half of this film, there are some moments that are just straight up goofy and silly. And honestly, there's one scene in particular in the first half that I thought was just way too silly, in my opinion. And it involves a lightning bolt coming from the sky. And I just thought, like, it just felt like a little bit too out there. Like, I get they were going for like a horror comedy approach, but it just felt like definitely it was just a bit over the top. But I'm not sure if I had a problem with that scene conceptually, but maybe it was just the way it was directed and the way that it was overall executed. Maybe if it was just done in a different way, I would have bought into it a bit more and I would have rolled with it. But just the way it was done, it was just way too out there for me. But the horror comedy approach didn't really bother me. And I thought that's really impressive, because horror comedy is a genre that is really hard to do, especially if you're not going full horror comedy and you still are trying to really immerse an audience into something that is disturbing and actually is unsettling. It's hard to really go back and forth between something that's silly and something that is actually like genuinely unsettling and terrifying. And I thought it actually did a good job at going back and forth between those genres. And the second half of this film is definitely a lot more grim, a lot more darker, a lot more unsettling. And I honestly think that it was executed incredibly well for what it was going for. Because as someone that is quite a skeptic and doesn't really believe in a lot of supernatural stuff, especially the more like theological stuff that has to do with religion, The way that it was directed and the way that it was edited and the way that the sound design was used and just the camera work, pretty much all of the aesthetic work, and including the acting as well. Like, the acting in this film I thought was really solid, but just every aspect of filmmaking came together in that second half that really immersed me and convinced me of what was happening in the story. And that's something that's really hard to do, especially for me, because again, I don't even, I have a harsh disbelief in the stuff that is like in the supernatural realm, especially the kind of supernatural stuff that this film particularly dives into. I was really impressed that the film was able to actually get me immersed in this kind of stuff. There's one scene in particular involving a shaman doing a ritual, and I was just really, really immersed in that scene. I found it to be incredibly anxiety inducing, and I really felt all the tension that was happening in that scene. And I just think all aspects of filmmaking really came together there, especially for that scene, and really got me on board for what the second half of this movie was going to do. But another thing that I found quite impressive about this film is the fact that there were absolutely no jump scares throughout this entire film. Not a single jump scare. It's a long film. Again, it's like 2 hours and a half, and there wasn't not one moment where there was a jump scare. And there's many moments in this film where he definitely could have just had a jump scare in it, and he doesn't do it because there's a lot of tension building moments that, any other director would just insert a cheap jump scare just to scare the audience. But here, he doesn't do that. The director definitely tries to do something a bit more creative, something more slow burn, on the more slow burn side. And he utilizes, makeup effects. I don't think there's really any CGI. There's probably some CGI in here, but you don't notice it because all of it seems to really rely on makeup and practical effects, and made the film much more convincing, made it much more immersive. And, again, huge kudos there, because this is a horror film. It's really lengthy, but not a jump scare in sight in its entire film. And I really, really love that because, as someone who loves horror, there's only very few films that I enjoy that actually utilize jump scares, and they have to be done in a certain way. And I just think for a film to have this long of a runtime and to be a horror film and not have a single jump scare and be incredibly effective for what it's doing, that's highly praiseworthy, especially when it comes to the horror genre. But another thing that I really enjoyed about the film is that it definitely makes you think more about it once it's over. And for me, it really sits with you. It allows you to kind of rethink everything that happened in the film and try to piece everything together and make sure that you have certain things right in your head. Because one thing about this film that I will say is that when it comes to the exposition, it's really exposition heavy in terms of the fact that this film relies on a lot of characters giving each other information and really spelling out a lot of things to the audience as the film rolls along. And, only some of it kind of bothered me, but most of it really, really worked, and most of it felt really natural for what it was going for. And, that was something it's again, for a movie that relies on a lot of exposition is a really, really hard thing to write in filmmaking. And for only like a little bit of it to bother me, I think is an achievement in writing. But even though this film does rely a lot on exposition, it still doesn't really spell the entire thing out for you in terms of what happens in this film's like horror mystery. And once the film's over, you are like just thinking in your head what exactly happened and what certain character actions meant. And that's something that I highly admire in filmmaking, is when it gives you something to really chew on after you're done watching the film. And this film, to me, certainly did that. But one thing about this film that I found quite frustrating is how flawed the main character is. And I understand that that is the purpose of it, and that was 100% intentional when it comes to what the director and writer wanted. But it gets to a point where it's just so incredibly frustrating and can be really unsatisfying at times, because it's just like, sometimes it's just there in his face and you're just like, are you not able to really piece together who is good and who is bad? And it's tough because, the main character in this film is put in a really tough position, and he's put in many tough positions throughout this film. And I can see someone being able not to make the right decision because their emotions are just, driving them up the wall, and they're just unable to come to a more logical, rational conclusion. but it's one of those things where I just can't help but be really frustrated by what the main character does in certain moments in this film. And, I guess it's not really the film's fault. It's just I'm kind of getting in my emotions about it. But just know that going into this film, there might be something that's going to be quite frustrating for you as you're watching it. But yeah, overall, I still think that this film deserves the praise that it gets. This is definitely a film that I think should be deserved on everybody's top 5 horror films of all time. Because it's just so fucking interesting and it's so creative with how it's doing everything. And you can tell the people that are behind this film really do appreciate the art of filmmaking and really care about their craft. And even though I do have some problems with the writing in terms of the exposition and some of the stuff being just a little bit too over the top when it comes to how silly and goofy it is, overall I think what this film was able to achieve was really, really impressive. And I found myself to be really immersed and really engaged throughout this entire film. So I'm going to give The Wailing an 8.5 out of 10. This was a fun and unique piece of filmmaking, and even though I may have not found it as scary and as disturbing as some people may have, I still found it to be really creative and effective. And what I appreciate most about it is that just the level of craft that went into this film, and that's something that I highly appreciate and admire. Well, that's all I got to say about The Wailing. If you haven't seen my coin toss video that I just put up, please check it out so you can find out which movie I'm going to be reviewing tomorrow. And if you really enjoyed what I had to say about The Wailing, please give this video a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.